So I've been thinking a bit about what videos I want to make, and I've decided to shift from trying to cover a lot of recent and popular media frequently to I'm going to make about one video every month, and it's going to be about a piece of media that really interests me. So this month I made a video about I had a couple ideas for what I was going to title this video. I was thinking about saying why The Middle is an underrated sitcom, but I don't really watch sitcoms. Like, I think the only other one I've seen in full is WandaVision. That's a joke. So I don't think I can call The Middle underrated, as that word kind of implies that I've seen enough of the sitcom genre to compare this sitcom to others, and like I said, I haven't. So instead, this video is why you should watch The Middle, because it's one of my favorite shows and I'd like to talk about it and hopefully convince you to check it out. So what is the show about? It follows the somewhat dysfunctional Heck family navigate through the mishaps of their life as middle-class people in the middle of Indiana. The five main characters of the show are the Heck family. Frankie is the narrator of the show, a devoted wife and mother who focuses a lot on the importance of family, despite the many frustrations this mindset brings. Mike, her husband, is characterized by a general lack of emotion and very straightforward manner. Oldest son Axel is popular, lazy, and narcissistic, but are ultimately good at heart. Daughter Sue has a sunny personality and is way too much of an optimist for her own good. And lastly, younger son Brick is introverted and bookish and has several weird quirks. The nice thing about having such an interesting group of characters is that because each character has their own strengths and flaws, each character is funny in a different type of way. The show can tell different types of jokes with its different characters, and odds are something will stick comedically. That's why I think just about anybody can find at least some aspect of the show funny. In fact, I'd like to break down the show character by character. I'll use scenes from the show to explain how each main character kind of fits as an interesting example of a certain character archetype. So first, I feel like a decent word to describe Frankie, who's played by Patricia Heaton, might be neurotic. I see that word used to describe a lot of comedic characters. I don't know if using it as a descriptor for Frankie Heck is the most correct way to use it, but it's the first word that came to my mind, and I didn't really want to spend a bunch of time thinking of a better word. So as for a scene that shows how Frankie is neurotic, I'm going to pick the episode Valentine's Day 2. So the Frankie and also Axel subplot for this one is that Axel has to prepare for a date on the holiday, like get a gift and pick out a restaurant and all that. He actually asks his mom for help. Frankie doesn't like that Axel's date is kind of edgy, but she kind of forgets that when he continues to actually want to spend time with his mother. And Frankie continues to trick Axel into spending time with her, and it gets to the point where, in Mike's words, Frankie is dating her son. I'm not going to spoil how Axel's edgy biker girl date goes, because I think it's a pretty neat punchline to the episode. But I hope describing the rest of that idea of a subplot provided a decent picture as why Frankie as a character can get into funny situations. Next up is Mike, played by Neil Flynn. I think the best term for him would be straight man. Again, I don't know if I'm using these character archetypes perfectly, but Mike is on paper a pretty normal guy. His one flaw, though, is that he's not great at being social or fun. So the episode I'd like to examine this aspect of his in is Halloween, which is actually a season 2 episode because season 1 is the only season that didn't get a Halloween episode for some reason. So the show's first Halloween episode is in the second season. Sorry about that tangent, it's just that Halloween is my favorite holiday, and I think the fact that only 8 seasons of the show covered it when other holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas got an episode every season is just kind of a missed opportunity. Anyway, back to Mike. In the first Halloween episode, he and Frankie get invited to a neighborhood Halloween party. You can probably guess that Frankie gets pretty excited about this and wants to wear costumes and really get into the holiday spirit. Mike really doesn't. His costume is himself. He's dressed as Mike. And Frankie complains that instead of him actively dancing, it was more like her dancing around him. You get the idea. Mike is no fun. But after Frankie tells him off for this, the episode ends with him finding a way to show he's not such a grump. And I'm not going to reveal what that is because it's the punchline in the episode, but I hope you get the idea. But yeah, that's Mike summed up, I guess. Now we get Axel, played by Charlie McDermott. I think I'd use the word slacker for him, maybe. The show is absolutely abundant with moments of the guy being lazy or making snarky comments, and I could probably easily find one to talk about in depth. But I think what makes Axel a more full and interesting character are the moments when we see that he actually does care about and appreciate his family. So the bit I'd like to talk about for Axel comes from the first season Thanksgiving episode. A subplot in this episode is that Brick really wants to go to the corn maze before they close it down, but Mike and Frankie are busy trying to finalize all the Thanksgiving preparations. So it's up to Axel to bring Brick to the maze. The older brother starts off being more interested in lazily hitting on girls he sees there, but once Brick gets lost, Axel's mindset noticeably shifts to complete panic. There's a pretty memorable line from Axel when he's trying to find his little brother, but it's funny and I'm not going to spoil it. But the bros are eventually reunited, and I think the scene when they arrive back home is interesting. When Axel's within earshot of his parents, he continues to act as his typical snarky teenage self. But when he's not continuing to express by his parents, he's continuing to express how happy he is that Brick ended up safe. This bit towards the end is not only really wholesome, I think it also perfectly shows the duality of the oldest tech child. On to the middle child. I actually know exactly how I'm going to describe Sue. She's played by Eden Shear, and she's a character that's just cringe comedy personified and perfected. Like, literally everything she does is embarrassing for her, and it's sometimes hard to watch a character be this awkward and naive. But Sue is compelling to watch because her cringiness also comes just so much optimism and not giving up. I think this quality is what really defines her character. The in-show example of this is the first season finale, Average Rules. Sue's subplot involves her getting ready to try out for the cross-country team, setting up a season 2 plotline. Nice. But the team is no cut, so Sue can actually make it. The coach just wants her to go around the school's track 5 times. This is harder than it sounds, though, because Sue got put in crutches early in the episode. However, despite this and every other obstacle thrown at her during the 5 laps, like there's rain and mud and dirt and the crutches break, she's able to push through and make the team. I think it's a beautiful way to end the first season, and it's like a defining moment for a special character. So that's Sue. Last, we got Brick, played by Atticus Schaffer, is the youngest child of the Heck family. And because he starts off the series only in elementary school and it ends when he's in high school, I feel like he probably changes or matures the most over the course of the show. He's a very eccentric character. He has a lot of quirks and more unconventional interests. And you could say, kind of make the argument that he outgrows them, but I think it's more accurate to say that he and his family learn to embrace some of them. We start to see this in the season 1 episode, The Block Party. One subplot follows Mike getting into a competitive spirit when preparing for a neighborhood rider mower race. However, he's bummed to find that Brick doesn't share his passion for sports and competitions. Brick does find joy in reading whatever he can, though, including the lawnmower manual. He's able to help his dad fix the mower and get it ready to win the race. I don't want to spoil how the race goes because it's, again, not just the punchline of the episode, but also just a straight up really wholesome moment. But basically, we see Mike truly begin to understand his younger son, quirks and all. Brick might be the most relatable character on the show for me, and his subtle growth over the course of the series is a truly rewarding experience. So I've discussed the characters and the comedy, but what I want to do for the rest of the video is dive into the show's atmosphere. This will probably be a longer and looser section because there's a lot of little things that give the show its charm. First of all, music. I don't consider musical score to be the one single most important aspect of filmmaking, but I do really think it's an aspect that can add a lot to any piece of media. The sitcom genre isn't really known for having iconic musical scoring, but I think the middle uses music well. There's some licensed music, like pop songs. Most of it works fine for the times it's used. There's one standout moment that I want to shout out, though. In the season 2 episode, Super Sunday, Sue and Brad, who's a really funny recurring character, and I'll talk about him more later. But they're training for a square dancing competition, and naturally the show needs to pick a song for the training montage. And you might be able to guess, it uses Eye of the Tiger. That's a pretty well-known training montage song. But they have a country cover of it. And I think it's really clever to put a twist on this classic training montage song, but I also just straight up found the bit where it's a country version. I just found that freaking hilarious. But yeah, that's a taste of the show's use of licensed music. But there's also the original score, which I'll call minimal but effective. I guess it plays certain short tracks of musical beats after certain comedic beats. That's the best way I'm going to be able to describe it. But also for the holiday episodes, it often arranges the musical melodies to well-known holiday jingles. Like there's a lot of Christmas songs and you probably know the tunes. So it plays like the versions of that without the lyrics. And it's more subtle than if it would just use the lyrical versions. I think it's a pretty neat trick to mix in the music only into the score. So yeah. Another thing that probably seems pretty standard, but I'm going to try and argue is a notable aspect of the show, is the setting. So it's set in Orson, Indiana, which is not a real town, but it's inspired by some small towns in the Midwest, and that gives it a certain atmosphere. Atmosphere is a word I like to use a lot, but I'm not the best at describing. I guess what I mean for the middle is that Orson has enough unique locations and attributes to make it unique, but it's also generic enough that you can compare it to a real place that you know. Another aspect of the setting that's familiar is what I'm going to call the time frame of each season. I think that counts as setting, right? Because setting is place, but also time. So each season presumably takes place the year it came out, although that can't completely work because of Sue's leap day 16th birthday. But what interests me is how certain events get repeated every season. A lot of sitcoms do this. That's what makes them comfort shows. But basically, every season will start off with going back to school and it will end with going back to summer. There's also episodes for major holidays in each season. I'm just going to list a few examples that I liked. First of all, season 2's premiere and finale episodes are literally titled Back to School and Back to Summer. That kind of frames the whole season. I think that's pretty cool. Season 3 and 4 each premiered with two-parters, and they show some of the events of the summer. I appreciated that because you don't really get a chance to see much of the summer season if your show airs during the school year. The finales and premieres of seasons 4 and 5, and then 6 and 7, they cover Axel and Sue's high school graduations and then college drop-offs, respectively. And then as for recurring events within each season, so I did some calculating, and there's Thanksgiving, Christmas episodes every season. A Halloween episode in 8 seasons, should have been all 9, but oh well. 5 or 6 Valentine's Day episodes, 5 or 6 Mother's Day episodes, and a few episodes where the family all goes traveling for something big. There's multiple seasons where Brick participates in a spelling bee, multiple episodes devoted to the Super Bowl and Mike's love of the Colts football team, and multiple episodes about Frankie's fascination with the British royal family. The show celebrates homecoming a few times, and the Heck children all encounter prom drama towards the end of certain seasons. I binged the entire show over the course of this summer, and it was interesting, for me at least, to notice these recurring events and trends. The show also has some recurring bits that add to the atmosphere, and they reward you for watching the series. Just off the top of my head, there's the blue snack bag that's always left at home before the family goes on a trip. The oven rarely gets used, so there's a quilt that gets stored and often forgotten about in there. Any and all of Brick's quirks probably count as a recurring gag. The most notable one is his whispering some words after his sentences. Similarly, nobody in the school staff ever seems to remember Sue. Axel and his friends get up to many wacky hijinks. They have an amateur part-time service business like lawn care and stuff called Bosco that pops up a couple times. Mike's father, Big Mike, always makes the excuse that he doesn't want to be a bother. That's a line that has stuck with me, I guess. And then on the other hand, Frankie frequently pushes her mantra of "you do for family." So I guess when I think about the atmosphere of the middle, some of these bits definitely come to mind. So lastly, I want to briefly discuss some of my favorite of the show's recurring characters. Definitely not as in-depth as I did for the core group, but just do a shout out for some other fun presences on the show. Actually, before I start on the recurring characters, there's a lot of guest stars that play one-off characters in the episodes. They're all comedically talented, of course, but I don't want to spoil any just because when I was watching the show, I found it fun to realize that, oh, so-and-so guest starred on the middle one time. But yeah, recurring characters I want to mention. First of all, Tag and Pat Spence, they're Frankie's parents, and Grandpa Big Mike, I said. They're all interesting and unique, and their personalities kind of, I think, provide some hints as to why Frankie and Mike are the way that they are. But the king of characters that are part of extended family is definitely Norm Macdonald's Uncle Rusty. Norm, rest in peace, had a way of being like annoying but also weirdly funny and charming, and that definitely appears in Rusty. I also like the parallel of him being Mike's weird brother, kind of like how Brick is Axel's. But yeah. So Frankie's first job is at Allert Motors. All I'm going to say is that Don Allert, the I'll be nice here and say old-fashioned, the show make jokes about him being racist and misogynistic. The car dealership owner, that character makes a very strong case for Brian Doyle Murray being funnier than his more famous brother Bill Murray. Also appearing in the first few seasons at Allert's is Bob Weaver, played by Chris motherfucking Kattan from the late 90s, early 2000s SNL. I think he's a literally me character. I don't want to elaborate. He just is literally me. Mike's job at the quarry also has some interesting people that make enough appearances to be a little notable, I think. But as for neighbors, on the one hand, you have the perfect, idyllic Donahue family, and on the other hand, you have the trashy delinquents that are the Glossners. Mom Rita Glossner doesn't show up as much as her troublemaking kids, but when she does, actress Brooke Shields steals the show. Axel's friends Sean and Darren compliment him well, and they arguably get more interesting when they each at one point shift to having plotlines connected to Sue. Axel's college buddies, Hutch and Kenny, they're different personalities from his high school ones, so I think they serve a different style of supporting character to him. And similarly, Sue's college friend Lexi is similar to her in some ways and different in others. Sue's other main friend, Brad, is one of the most iconic characters of the show. He's very stereotypically gay, which most of the other characters pick up on, but Sue doesn't, and he doesn't realize himself, at least not for a while. I think it's good that the joke here was eventually dropped and Brad was allowed to come out and just be a gay character on the show, but the irony was really freaking funny sometimes while it was there. But he was actually introduced as Sue's first boyfriend, and that reminds me, I just want to say Sue and Axel each had a variety of interesting love interests over the course of the series. But one last recurring character that's mainly connected to Sue, I feel, I have to mention Reverend Tim Tom. He's the local youth pastor. He can make up songs on the spot, and he has a mantra that it's tough being a teen. I'd probably say that he's right, and I definitely say he's a fun character, like all the others I briefly mentioned. So all the recurring aspects I talked about, they work because the show is really good at keeping its continuity. It only breaks occasionally. And any continuity breaks are stuff that you really wouldn't notice unless you binge the show and really focus on every detail. But on the bright side, if you heavily analyze the show, you'll probably find more examples of the continuity being insanely strong. An example I want to mention is the season 2 Thanksgiving episode. Frankie invites her coworker Bob to Thanksgiving, and he brings his new girlfriend who's a librarian. But she's not a new character, just came up out of nowhere. One day my brother was watching a season 1 episode, I had already seen it, but when I walked by, I noticed that the extra for the librarian in the scene from this earlier episode was the same actress that would later play Bob's girlfriend. That's such a little detail that the show really didn't have to do, but it did, and that type of thing makes a good show. This show is really good, at least I think so. I caught a good amount of episodes when I was younger when it was actively airing, but getting to binge the entirety over the summer has been really fun. The middle just has so many good characters and good aspects of its atmosphere and funny jokes, very funny jokes. The show is consistently funny over 9 seasons, and that's an achievement. But along with making me laugh, it got me invested in its world and characters. A quirky youngest child, a cringy middle daughter, a snarky older son who's ultimately good, a straight man father who deals with all the wacky antics of his family, and a mother who incites much of the craziness in her efforts to do for family. I love these characters, and I'm attached to their struggles and successes. Because of this, I consider To the Middle to be one of my favorite shows. It's 9 seasons of quality television, or one heck of a ride.